Governor Bruce Rushton publicly promised he won't lock out workers, but should unions tune him out? That's coming up next on Capitol View. AFSCME, the state's largest public employees union, says it isn't buying Governor Bruce Rushton's public promise that he won't lock them out. They say, that the governor may just instead force a strike. That's part of what we'll talk about this week on Capitol View. I'm Amanda Vinicky, State House Bureau Chief for Illinois Public Radio and WUIS, joined this week by Bruce Rushton, reporter for the Illinois Times, and also Kent Redfield, professor emeritus for the University of Illinois Springfield, and a political scientist extraordinaire. So, fellas, let's get down to business. Governor Bruce Rushton has had I'd say topsy-turvy relationship with unions, but really that's not accurate. It's been pretty much all bad. He maintains that he is not trying to completely do away with unions, that he is trying to negotiate in good faith as a contract had expired actually a couple of months ago. There's a second temporary agreement in place with AFSCME, the state's largest public employees union. It is under this that the legislature passed a measure that basically does away with options of unions being able to strike or the governor being able to lock out union members if they fail to reach an agreement. This legislation would say either side can instead move it to a binding arbitrator. Governor Bruce Rushton, during a press conference in Springfield this week, the first one he's had in actually a couple of weeks, Rushton said that it is the worst bill he has ever heard of in Illinois. He says he doesn't trust those arbitrators, believes that they are in unions' pockets, but he said he won't force a lockout. So what do we make of this? Is that a promise? He said, I'll put it in writing if you need. Should we make something of that? There are a lot of state employees, particularly in the Springfield area, that are fearful that it could come to that.
Well, first off, worst bill he's ever heard of probably shows that he hasn't been in the Illinois government very long. But that said, you just don't know, once again, what this guy is really up to, because he's saying, I won't lock you out. Meanwhile, he's getting in touch with retirees saying, hey, you want to come back to work on a contract basis in case, for whatever reason, these state workers aren't on the job. He's also apparently looked into the prospect of having the National Guard perhaps do some state work. Here comes deer tag season. Instead of getting it from the usual person, you get it from somebody in a uniform. I don't know. But there's good reason to not believe specific, when he says, I won't lock you out, well then what are you really calling it? Forcing a strike, possibly.
It could be just a matter of semantics,
Semantics,
really.
exactly
a lockout
right.
and not so many words.
Exactly, yeah. Because he said, I'm no foe of labor unions. Unions are fine, but anybody who's in a union, and I think most objective observers would say, no, that's not the case. And so I think it could well just be a matter of semantics.
It's interesting. I read an editorial that said, and I of course won't take umbrage with whatever opinion a newspaper wants to have, but it had a line that said, Governor Rushton has always been clear about where he stands on unions. And I said, like heck, no he hasn't. I covered that campaign. He was clear and then he wasn't clear and then...
Not a priority is a
Right.
priority. What day is it?
So Kent, this lockout, has Illinois ever seen either a lockout or a strike, whatever you want to call it?
No, I asked, not with the main state employee union, AFSCME. It's never happened. And we've extended the contract partially because I don't think the governor wants to have a labor crisis when we don't even have a state budget. We can only fight so many wars on so many fronts at the same time. He's indicated he has backed off a little bit on some of his demands, like forcing everybody that's in the old Tier 1 pension system into the two-tier pension system. But it's clear
Which was a big ask.
Yeah, but they're not. They really aren't close, and both on non-economic issues and on economic issues, and you could get. If one side refuses to extend it, we could get down to last best offer, and then if the governor puts on the table, I want a 4-year wage freeze and I want you to pay 70% more of your health care out of pocket, I think the union would probably have no option other than to strike, because if they were going to maintain any credibility with their members, if there's a huge give back. And so we really aren't negotiating. We're not close to getting down to what might be a reasonable compromise. We have no idea what the state budget's going to look like, so we're counting on mythical savings from employee health care, but nobody knows how much money we need or don't need. So we're a long way from them getting together, but as long as the budget is still not resolved, I don't think we're very close to having either an impasse and a strike.
Because it's in both sides' best interest to continue this temporary deal. Neither side at this point would want to be responsible for leading to a actual shutdown of state government.
Yeah, and part of the rationale in the court cases under which we're paying people is that we have a contract, therefore people have to get paid. Well, if you don't extend the contract again, all of a sudden there's no basis of the lawsuit saying why we should be paying all these state employees. So,
and then members get mad at their union for leading to their not having any paychecks, or on the opposite side, if the blame were to go to Bruce Rushton, it's basically Illinois has been functioning without a budget because of all these court hearings. So nobody's getting blamed for that. So that might be part of it. Yeah. As you noted, there's both economic issues at play, but also the non-economic ones. It's hard for us to cover, obviously, because we're not privy to these inside meetings. But Bruce, do you see this as something where unions have gotten too much from the state in previous years? As Governor Bruce Rushton has said, you've had past governors, particularly Democrats, that have taken a lot of money from, say, AFSCME. So therefore, it's led to, he says, too good of deals that were beyond the state's means. Or is the governor asking for too much on both the economic and, again, the non-economic side? You're talking grievances and such.
Yeah, again, we don't know because we're not privy to what's inside the room. I mean, would the union settle for the status quo? Let's just roll, press the reset button and do this same contract for another 4 years or 3 years or what have you. I would imagine the union would be willing to do that given this environment and this uncertainty. And so my guess is that Rushton is probably asking for a significant amount, probably in health care. I mean, if nothing else, he can't touch the pensions. I mean, that's the big boogeyman of the room, and he's not going to, he's not going to be able to cut, I think, any kind of a significant deal to reduce pension benefits with the union. And so I think that health care would probably be the most likely economic thing that's out there. And as you say, I mean, if they might put up with a tiny bit, maybe 10% or something like that, something small, because folks who are in the private sector, who are private sector employees, tend to pay a significantly larger percentage of health care than public sector employees. And so politically wise, that might be palatable. But I got to believe that I agree with you. I think he's probably asking for a huge give back in terms of healthcare, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if he wants something on the grievance procedures that would make it unpalatable for the union. I mean, because they do see there are a number of instances out there of at least in the public eye of public government employees getting too much, and sometimes, I mean, I guess the most glaring example of that isn't so much in a union contract, but in workman's compensation, the prison guards and some of the scams that have been pulled there. I have repetitive stress injury from opening and closing doors with keys, that sort of thing. But you get right down to, it makes good headlines, but I think Rushton's asking for a lot and may well be trying to force the union's hand.
Because it's clear this is heartfelt for him, to me at least. When you hear him talking,
he has a heart.
Passion.
I wasn't aware of that.
But so we have this law. The governor vetoed it, so it isn't actually law now. And there is some question as to whether the General Assembly will allow that veto to stand or if they will override it. It passed just at the end of session in May, but now, the thought had always been that maybe there wouldn't be enough numbers in the House to override a gubernatorial veto. House Speaker Michael Madigan saying, yeah, there is. Why wouldn't he call it? And it's actually Senate President John Cullerton. This measure has to go through the Senate before the House has a chance to decide on an override. And the Senate President saying he's weighing his options. Is that Cullerton trying to play nice? Are there not the votes? What do we think? Is this arbitration measure, so no strike, no lockout, just for 4 years, go figure when Rauner's in office, going to become law or not? Predictions?
Well, and it is, the point you just made is really important. This is, this has a sunset in it. So this is a total reflection of the inability of both sides to get together, the dysfunction that's taking place within state government. And you don't make up, normally a union would not agree to compulsory arbitration. They want to be there at the bargaining table. And so this is highly unusual for them to be in a position where they're going to, any union to give up the right to strike. And whether or not, the Senate president is feeling like, if I really cut the legs out from underneath the governor, then that would limit my ability to move in some other areas in terms of, the most important property taxes, but there's certainly been some movement on workers' comp. And so this does seem to flip back and forth. When you just assume that, well, the Senate's going to do this and the House is going to do that, then they turn around. The governor says, I'm going to do one thing, then he says he's not going to do another. It's very hard to keep track of who has what position and what kind of game is being played.
All right. Oh, Bruce.
Well, I would think that they would actually be able to override this, and they've kind of got it in their hip pocket, that they can pull out at some point in time where they can say, okay, enough's enough. We've got so much going on here with the budget. We need to. We can fight a war on maybe 2 fronts, but not 16. And so let's get this off the table here and go on and try concentrating on getting the budget done and taxes and these kinds of issues. We don't need this labor strife in the way. And the unions might just be willing to go along with that given the circumstances.
Ken, you brought up property taxes. That is something that we saw action on this week. The Illinois Senate passed a measure that is a property tax freeze for 2 years. That's something that Governor Bruce Rauner has wanted. He says is one of his, on the checklist for moving ahead with budgetary matters, that has to get done first, but it does more than that. It also says that the state has to pay the Chicago public school teachers' employers' costs for pensions going forward. It would wipe out the current funding formula for schools. So it really is multi-tiered, and it would also make way for the city of Chicago, which is facing problems with those teachers' pensions, to re-implement a local property tax. So a freeze, but also go ahead and tack on another tax to help pay for these pensions. That passed the Senate. It took the second try, actually, for it to happen. That's John Cullerton's initiative. Previously, House Speaker Michael Madigan has said that he doesn't want the state to cover any school's pension costs. That's free lunch, and the state not having any control over costs determined by local governments in terms of how much they pay their teachers and therefore how much pensions cost. So what do we make of the speaker this week holding a press conference and saying he's open to it? He thinks it's a reasonable ask from Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Logical.
Yeah, and that's a shift in position, because the speaker and at one point the Senate president were very strongly in favor of essentially cost shifting, that they wanted units, every school district in the state to do what Chicago has been doing, which is picking up the employer's share of the pension contributions. And so that was one kind of in the big thing of how do we deal with the pension debt, that we're going to cost shift to the local school districts. And now we're kind of, we're going in the other direction, but on the other hand, if you freeze property taxes and also cost shift, then that's putting a lot of pressure on school districts outside the city of Chicago. I mean, this would be historic under a different set of circumstances, or at least very notable, that we've got, the General Assembly voting for a property tax freeze and a sunsetting the school aid formula, and it just becomes, one more thing in this, because the governor says, well, this doesn't have my little minor provisions that give flexibility to units of local government, the flexibility being to basically gut collective bargaining for...
Back to unions.
For unions. And so, as long as he's, the Senate president, this minority leader, Christine Rodogno, is saying, well, it doesn't have that flexibility, that freedom for the local and we don't, we always make up a good, it's a euphemism or a nice way of saying things without really talking about what we're actually talking about.
It's just so tantalizing because you do see something. I mean, Illinois, everybody I think probably agrees at this point that we have our property taxes are too high. They're crushing compared to what other states are. So, there's at least an agreement in principle that we need to do something about it. And so you get a vote like this, but there's just this huge but which scuttles everything, and in some degree it's maddening. And at the same time, I mean, some of the larger issues, I mean, that really should be getting addressed. For example, modernizing our tax system. That's why we're in this financial mess as much as any other reason. I mean,
and that's not even getting talked about.
It's not even getting talked about. The pensions not even getting talked about. These are the big basic issues that absolutely need to be addressed, and they're not.
Is that true? Or if you talk to Bruce Rauner, he would say, one of the fundamental issues is how much governments are having to pay in union costs because we are such a union state and the unions are in bed with Democrats. I mean, does he have a point, or is that all just a political play and a facade that unions, I know any union member would hear that and say, hey, he's wrong. Who are you even kidding? That's a political ploy.
Even if he's right about part of that, even if he's partially right, so what? I mean, it still doesn't change the fact that we have a tax system designed for the 1950s, and that's a major, major issue. That you cannot,
services aren't taxed.
Services aren't taxed. Retirement isn't taxed. Yeah, we've got this huge pension mess, and you cannot grow your way out of this. Let's say that he eliminated collective bargaining entirely. Bruce Rauner got his way. Those problems would still exist. It's not going to fix those. And so you can't grow your way out of this stuff. I mean, you need to make some fundamental hard choices, some change. And really, at least from a theoretical standpoint, these changes shouldn't be overly difficult because everybody agrees that we should be taxing services. Anybody with half a brain agrees with that.
Rauner himself, it was part of his campaign
himself said
plan.
that it was part of his campaign pledge. And then Rauner on the campaign trail, well, unions aren't my priority. We need to tax services. Now that he's in office, it seems like
I've been wondering about when the rest of the Republican Party got on that bandwagon. It's been interesting, as you've noted, the Senate Minority Leader Christine Radogno has continually, during these property tax discussions, both in committee and on the Senate floor, when the votes came up, said, we respect this. Thank you, almost there, but not quite. We need the collective bargaining portions and the local freedom. I don't know how much I'd heard that from her before. Is this Republicans sticking with their governor because it's leadership? Or again, Rauner keeps on saying Democrats are sticking with unions because of campaign cash. Are Republicans sticking with Rauner because of campaign cash?
Yes and no. I mean, I think one thing that happened, I think Radogno is actually, I think she's carrying the governor's water on that in that respect. I really do. But very notably, yesterday there was the Kafka vote on the museum, and 3 Republicans broke ranks and said no, we shouldn't be closing the state museum. And it was Poe and I can't remember the other 2.
WUIS and.
Downstaters.
Downstaters. You're not supposed to break ranks with the governor. At least that's that's kind of the new rules. And the GOP and 3 have done that. And this is a high profile.
We've seen a couple of splits in the House, and also the Senate approved some $75 million more for education. That's something that the governor, when he signed the education budget into law, he said, I want more money. He was asked about it and didn't comment this week. Didn't seem to know that happened. Regardless, there was a split in the Senate GOP, and you had several members, those in districts that presumably would be advantaged by that extra cash, saying and going along with it.
Yeah, but tiny cracks, but I mean cracks nonetheless.
Yeah, and
tiny cracks turning to big ones.
Yeah, we're going to, at the moment, the Republican caucus in the House and the Senate, caucuses in the House and the Senate, are going to go with the governor. I mean, not because you don't want to throw your own governor under the bus when he's the first Republican governor in 12 years, and also because he obviously has a lot of money sitting there in some campaign organizations, which could be big trouble for Republicans in primaries. And so, both of those are factors. He owns the Republican Party. He talks at times like he owns the House and the Senate Republican caucuses too. And so,
I thought House Speaker Michael Madigan owned and controlled everything.
Well, if you have if you're governor of the state of Illinois, if you have one of the strongest grants of executive authority of any governor in any state in the nation, you are not defenseless. If you are worth, pick a number, $500 million, and you've got $20 million sitting in a campaign fund plus some more tuck a few other places, I don't feel real sorry for the governor in terms of his political position. But this just gets to be so unreal. I mean, one of the reasons property taxes are high in Illinois is that the state contributes, we're way on the low end of the amount of state funding that goes into schools. Therefore, it has to come from somewhere. So we've developed a system with high property taxes that are mostly about schools. I mean, if we had lots of revenue, then the state could give money to schools, and we could lower property taxes. But so the fiscal problems are there. The fact that we don't have a budget, and then there's an ideological war about. The business climate, I think, is fair, and we need to be addressing that. The idea that collective bargaining and unions are the root of all evil in terms of everything that's going wrong with the state, I think is extremely overblown. And so it's gotten to be a very unreal conversation.
And one thing I think with the tax issue that I think we should be concerned about is the governor has labeled this a tax increase. I mean, he's gone from on the campaign trail talking about modernizing the tax system, and with the service tax, that's kind of what everybody, that's code for we're going to start taxing services. Well, now he said, he's held up this thing about we need a fundamental structural change, otherwise we're just going to increase taxes. Well, you should be careful about when you use the word tax increase. I mean, because that's different than modernizing the system. I mean, a tax increase, I think in a lot of folks' mind says, okay, the sales tax goes from 9% to 10%. You're increasing the tax. No, what you're doing here is that you're spreading the base, you're broadening the base, and so different people. I mean, more revenue. Some people will pay more, other people will pay perhaps. It's going to hit different people differently. But when you're talking about modernizing, that's a lot different than starting to label it as a tax increase. And if Bronner keeps doing that, he's going to find it, I think, a little more difficult.
He's going to get that modernization.
To get that modernization, he's going to paint himself into some risks, at least painting himself somewhat into a corner.
Well, because the longer that this stretches on, the closer we get to the 2016 election, when the entire Illinois House, what is it? I think this year it's actually, is it two-thirds of the Senate? Will be up for election, so it'll be even more difficult for legislators to take those votes, particularly after this war of words and all of the hard feelings that are being built up. There was some advancement, however. We saw the Senate also go forward with about $5 billion in funding. It's not state money, federal money, but it passes through the state, intended to go to social service agencies. There was widespread agreement on it, bipartisan, Governor Bruce Rushton agreeing to it. We saw no votes in the Senate. There's a but. The House Speaker, Michael Madigan, did say the House will consider it next week, but he said there may be some add-ons. We've heard from agencies, even the governor's office, he said, about elements they wanted included. The governor on Thursday had a press conference in Chicago, his second in as many days, and he brought up the notion that he's heard rumors that Madigan is trying to add on money for Chicago public schools to help pay their pensions, and then he no longer supports that if it's tacked onto this federal bill. So is this just, enough to make you want to scream, or is this fear-mongering? Do you think Madigan would try and pull that, or does making it public quash that? I don't know.
I can't. I'm sure the governor is shocked that anyone would include a poison pill in a piece of necessary
he hasn't done that at all.
Legislation.
No.
But I don't think, I think this is appropriating money that, when people say, we're not funding women, infants, and children, WIC, but we're funding the state fair, this makes everybody look terrible. So I think this probably gets done. It's probably a clean bill. But, pretty soon we're going to have appropriated or be under court order to spend the whole state budget. There won't be anything left. There's one.
It's already, I think, nearing by some accounts, it over 60, upwards to 80 if you count in Medicaid downstate.
And the big chunks that are left are social services and higher education. And if that's only 6 $7 billion and you need to make $8 billion, $7 billion worth of cuts, I think people at universities are feeling good that they're getting paid at this point, but you're getting more and more out there on an island where there isn't a lot left to leverage.
Not a lot left to leverage. And further, the governor, he said that this is all about no more deficit spending. Is he going to have that opportunity? It has, by allowing all of this to go to courts and not negotiating on a budget, is the governor basically closing his options for bringing down how much the state spends?
Well, maybe it's a Hail Mary in hopes that he can blame a judge for whatever happens. I mean, you don't ever want to let the courts be making your decisions for you, but
unless you do.
Yeah, but if you can't. Look, he needed really, it's an excellent point. The longer this stretches on, the harder it is to get anything done because you're approaching the elections. It's not helping matters that Rauner is out putting out mailers and hit pieces on legislators. We've seen TV commercials. It's almost like the campaign is already beginning.
Or never stopped.
Or never stopped. And you'd hoped, and it was probably a vain, a hope in vain, but the time to get this sort, given the problems the state faced, the time to get this done was, early and quick, and so that 2 years would roll around and the voters would kind of forget and we could go on about our way. But I don't think Rauner really wanted to do that, or if he wanted to do that, he's certainly approaching it in a strange way because he's linking everything together. It's like there's no step he can take on any front we're not also talking about collective bargaining and workman's compensation and a host of other issues. And how can you get anything done if you approach life that way? You wouldn't be able to get anything done.
It really does seem quite intractable at this point in time. The Illinois Senate has adjourned until the 19th of August. Go figure. That's Governor's Day, when Republicans have their time to rally at the state fair. The state fair, as we noted, is ongoing. They say vendors will just be paid late regardless of all of this, regardless of social service agency leaders having a press conference this week where dozens of them stood up to reporters and told some sad stories, calling it really a death march. You also had this week, the General Assembly did send to the governor a measure that really, at his request and his rallying cry, they will no longer receive cost of living bumps that could be worth about $2,000. It would have been their first raise in 7 years, but no longer. Going to go year 8. So that's all the time we have for this week on Capitol View. I'm Amanda Vinicky with Illinois Public Radio and WUIS, joined by wonderful guests Bruce Rushton of the Illinois Times and the University of Illinois Springfield, Kent Redfield. Thanks so much, and be sure to check us out on Facebook. That's Capitol View Politics. Bye.